Historical Society Third Thursday Lecture Series. We are getting close to the end of our 13th year of these, and it's so good to see so many people churning out. We're starting to get ready for our 2025 series, so if you have any thoughts on that, let me know, and we'll put those people on a list as possible speakers. Although I did get an email from a potential speaker who said, no, Manchester says you can't have me. I can only speak in Manchester. Oh. So it's rife. So please get names. We need them. Today our speaker is someone who I'm sure that many of you are familiar with. She is active in studying the history, especially of East Dorset. She is a professional textile conservator, originally from West Rutland.
Parents.
Yeah, parents. And who has retired, quote unquote, to East Dorset back in, 2016?
Yep.
I'm just doing this from memory, so forgive me if I get too much wrong. But then a few years ago, she and Ruth Stewart took upon the monumental task of documenting the historical architecture and history of all the houses in East Dorset Village for an application to become a historic village. And that they submitted the paperwork eons ago, and then about a month ago, 2 months ago, it received that official designation, which is wonderful. So yes, and so let me expound on that process and the history of East. No, that's what Michelle's here for. Yeah. So let's give it up for Michelle Pagan.
Thank you for coming out, everybody. I really enjoy doing the research, but I really enjoy sharing it with people. So thank you so much for showing up. Even before I have 11 pages of notes to get through, so. But let me explain how we got started on this. This whole project started about 50 years ago when Ruth Stewart moved here with her young husband, and over the last 50 years.
Somebody sit in a chair.
There you go, 2 chairs right there. Welcome. We're just barely getting started. Don't miss anything. So for 50 years, Ruth Stewart raised her family here and collected old stories from people. And she was a very serious volunteer here at the Historical Society. And so for 50 years, Ruth has been collecting old pictures and writing down notes of stories people told her and things like that. So then when John and I moved into the area in 2016, Ruth and I met probably here at the Historical Society. We can't remember exactly when or where, right, Ruth? And she started telling me, I've got all this stuff that, East Dorset notes and stuff, and what am I going to do with it all? And I said, I know what you're going to do with it. My background is museums and historical societies is where I've spent my profession. So I know a little bit about these things. So I said, that's what we ought to do. Let's take all of your notes. I'll contact Montpelier and find out what's the process for starting. We have lovely Dorset on the National Register of Historic Places, but in my opinion, East Dorset is just as lovely. What happened? Why was East Dorset not ever documented in that way? So since about 2019, I think my earliest notes are from 2019, Ruth and I have been coordinating our efforts. Largely what we did was I would go into the town clerk's office, even throughout COVID. I'd have to make an appointment, go into the town clerk's office and read all those old deeds, all the way back to the late 18th century. I'm pretty good at reading all that really old cursive, So I'm the one who kind of dug up all the old details, from the old grand lists and things like that. And then Ruth really I have to give her credit. She's really been the wordsmith of taking all the bits and pieces of research that I did and pulled it all together to make it a legible, logical kind of presentation for the state. And so it's been about 5 years of work, condensed into about 11 pages of notes. So what I'm going to be reading to you today is largely Ruth's condensation of all the research notes that I had together we've dug up over the last 5 years. So we're going to start with this original image of a colored lithograph from about 1872, and this was one. It's called the View of East Dorset, the Italian Marble Mountain and Mills. And this was done by a professor who traveled around and did these kind of bird's eye views of towns in the second half of the 19th century. The Shelburne Museum had a whole exhibit on exactly this kind of artwork. Here's a close-up, so that's that same image, but looking close-up now. There's quite a bit of artistic licenses taken here, but I think you can see this is from the mountains, the foothills of the mountains, looking down on the east side of East Dorset, looking down into the village. And so I think you can see, here are the marble mills here. So this would be like Route 7 would be over here today. Here's the train. Can you see the train with the smoke trailing behind the train? So the train tracks, of course, run all through here. I think this is probably Benedict Road over there. Here's the schoolhouse that used to be here. The church, let's see, the spires of the church. I'm so close I can barely see it.
Right by the small center.
Back over this way, right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, so there's the Congregational Church right there. Here's the flat top roof that is still standing there at the intersection there. How many people really know what I'm talking about when I talk about Mad Tom Road and Village Street? Okay, that's the main drag, basically. Those are the four corners, right, in East Dorset. The church is on one corner, the Wilson House is on the southeast corner, and this flat-topped roof is in private hands now. That's on the southwest corner, and the post office is on the northwest corner. So that's what he saw and what he sketched and then had colored back in 1872. Here's another one, the Medowee Valley is what he did, and I think this is actually hanging over at the Dorset Inn. When you go into the Dorset Inn, just past the main desk there, is this the same kind of thing. Like I say, he did many of this same kind of artwork. There's one for Manchester that I found on sale online right now. I think it's about $1,800, is a color chromed lithograph for sale right now for Manchester, Vermont, if anybody's interested. Okay, so here's the outline of what I'm going to talk to you about today with our new sign. Isn't it lovely?
Yeah.
2024 Vermont Registry of Historic Places. Okay, so first what I'm going to be doing is showing you some images of houses that are actually earlier than East Dorset Village, okay, that existed and still exist now. Then we'll move into part 2, the East Dorset Historic District, and that's where I'm going to be telling you who lived where and why. How did they come to be? Bless you. How did they happen to be living there? And then finally, let's talk a little bit about these historic designations. What does it mean to be on the National Register, or what does it mean to be just on the State Register of Historic Places? And then finally, just some sources for more information if you're interested. Okay, so this is a close-up of North Dorset on the left and East Dorset on the right. The yellow are houses that I will be talking to you about later on in the talk. For example, right here in North Dorset, this home right here was owned by two men. It was a duplex, and that's presently what they call Dorset House up at the Shelburne Museum. Actually came out of North Dorset. And then these other names that I have, Cochrane, Ames, Beebe, Williams, Sexton, Bowen, and Hewlett are all names, family names that I will be talking to you about in connection with the village, because the pattern was everybody was a farmer. Everybody had acreage they had to farm. They all had animals. Everybody was growing sheep and flax, making their own fabric, feeding their own animals. So everybody was a farmer. And then the railroad came in. And when the railroad arrived, people wanted to live where the action was, okay? Lots of times people moved into town, but they kept their acreage outside of town. All right, so you're going to see these names again and again. Here's the historic village right here. So most of my talk is going to be about this little area right down here. But people were spread out, as you can see. Emerald Lake, right there. Okay, so Dorset House, as I just mentioned, is from about 1840. It's now up at the Shelburne Museum, and it's actually out of North Dorset. And it didn't look that wonderful when Mrs. Havemeyer started collecting buildings from all over Vermont and bringing them to the Shelburne Museum. This is perhaps what it looked like. This is the house around 1890. Okay, the Deming House there at the corner of Morse Hill Road and Benedict Road, looking as beautiful as it is today and as it was around the turn of the century. This is the George Marsh home, which I'm sure you don't recognize from this photograph. This is what it looks like from the back, the original salt box profile, as you can see, right? That roof line is the salt box roof line. And this is what it looks like today. This is the black goat folk artist there on the east side of Route 7A coming up out of Manchester. All right, everybody oriented? Know what we're talking about there? Sometimes I think older is better. And then, of course, the beautiful Ames House. Currently, the Frost Well Drilling Company is located there, also known as the Battenkill Rise Farm. The Beebe Farmstead, of course, I think everybody knows that, right, because of the horse festival, the competition that happens there every summer on the east side. The house is on the west side of Route 7, the competition is on the east side. Coming from Route 7 then over the east is on Bowen Hill Road, is this really lovely Greek Revival, gable front Greek Revival house owned by some out-of-staters. And this is what it looked like years ago. The door used to be in the center. Do you see that now? Right? The door used to be in the center. It is no longer. And here's an old image of the family. On both maps, the 1856 and the 1869, there's the Bowen family, first in the one house and then in the second house, but on Bowen Hill Road. We don't know which house this is, but there they are. The Caleb Buffum house coming down from upper Madtown Road, shall we call it, just over the line from Mount Tabor. This is very lovely, heavily restored, as you might say, because it earlier on was a poorhouse, the town poorhouse. So it's come a long ways. Coming further on down Madtown Road now, I'm calling this Sexton House number 1 because I'll be talking to you later. The Sextons actually, first they lived in this house and then they bought the house next door. This is presently Dr. Nisenson's house. I think some of you know the podiatrist maybe in Manchester, Dr. Nisenson. He was on the garden tour just this past July. And then the Sexton house number 2 is right next door because the Sexton family moved from that house into this house. And this is what this house looked like around the year 1900 from a postcard.
Are these all on Madtown Road?
These are all on Madtown Road. This is, so far, this is up, if you're going into Madtown, if you're going into East Dorset, you take that 90-degree turn.
Yes.
That's what all these are.
Yes.
These are all, yeah, up past that 90-degree turn. And we're gonna end this orientation to older houses with Ira Cochran's house. It's owned by the Davidson family right now, and it truly is the oldest home in East Dorset, somewhere around 1770. Okay, so now we're ready to move on to the historic district itself, all right? But those same names that I was just mentioning, I'm going to be talking to you again, because, like I just said, people lived on the outskirts of town because they needed acreage for their farms, and then a lot of them moved into what we call East Dorset, lovely downtown East Dorset today. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the Cochran family first, and if you look at this 1856 map, I've highlighted for you, this is the house that I was just showing you, the Ira Cochran's house. These were in-laws. He built the hotel, he built the duplex right next door, he probably built the school or had a hand in building the school, and then out here he had the lumber yard with the lumber spout that brought the timber down off the mountain because he had the contract to provide the wooden rails, are they, for the railroad coming into town. So he was into marble, he was into lumber, he was on the board of the railroad. I wish I had a map or a picture for you of Ira Cochran, but we haven't been able to find one yet. I don't know why this is. I still have fingers crossed that we will. So anyway, in the meantime, I have an image for you of Mr. Ira Batchelder. Batchelder is another big name from Peru. So the family was up in Peru. In fact, if you look at a History of Peru book, you'll see 9 different Batchelder families up there, okay? And look at the Batchelders were here. Actually, they had 2 houses here, one over here, one here, and one here. All Batchelders who came into town and intermarried with the Cochrans, by the way. So here's that Cochran house again, looking at it from the south side now. And now it's time for me to start with my notes, all right? So this house belonged to Ira Cochran, an entrepreneur businessman who was born in 1811 in Peru. and moved here as a child with his parents and 3 other siblings, and 2 more sisters were born here in East Dorset. He was a land speculator, owning many acres in East Dorset. He began building the East Dorset Hotel, today's Wilson House, in 1846, opening it in 1852 as the North-South Western Vermont Railroad line was completed, and he served as a director of that railroad. He partnered with Mr. John Manley to operate the lumber spout that I was just showing you on the map, descending from Peru, and thus provided the lumber for the railroad ties that were needed to bring the Western Vermont Railroad to Dorset. He also operated a marble mill across the road from his house and up on Dorset Mountain, and the 1850 Grand List identified him as the #1 wealthiest individual in all of Dorset. The house remained in the family until 1961. 1961. And Dr. John Cochran, Ira's grandson, was the last of Ira's direct descendants, doctoring from this house. Reportedly, the south door, which this is looking at it from the south, so the south door was constructed extra wide to move caskets easily in and out, since he was a doctor operating out of the front room of this house. The 1770 section, which is this back here, complete with the original cooking hearth, is the oldest known structure in East Dorset Village. And just as an aside, I hope everybody understands something I learned. The earliest houses were the wings that we would see on today's houses. If there's a wing in the back and then another section of the house on the front, this is the earliest section. And then it became fashionable to have the door, your front door, which would be around here, facing the road. It became fashionable. It's the reason why nobody uses their front door today. Because everybody first went in through the side door. Okay? So that's just an aside, that's something I learned in doing this research. Okay, so he then, as I mentioned, he had the Wilson House Hotel built and opened in 1852. It's on the National Register as of 1995. I'm not going to go into it in depth. I'm just going to show you a couple of older pictures. You see how there's a big dormer across the top here, right? With all those windows? And the earlier picture doesn't have the dormer, does it? Lots more trees, no dormer. And here's another older image with all the trees out front. Trees make such a difference, don't they? Okay, I'm not going to say much. Okay, so around the corner now, heading east now towards the mountain on Mad Tom Road, this building is significant under criterion A for community planning and reflects the growth and development of a typical Vermont village. This house is shown to be a duplex in an early 1900s photo. The 1856 Rice Harwood map shows this house in its present location with I. Cochran listed as the owner occupant immediately to the east of the hotel. This is immediately to the east of the hotel, which Mr. Cochran had built. The Beers Atlas lists Ira Cochran, prominent community developer and businessman, as the owner. It could have perhaps provided affordable housing for one of his workers in the marble mills or the next door hotel. And the 1915 Sandboard map labels the east end of this house, that would be this end, as the post office. Okay, across the street now is the 129 Mad Tom Road Brock Kent families. The 1856 Rice Harwood map associates this house with John Brock, an early East Dorset resident and Revolutionary War veteran. In fact, East Dorset was originally considered West Peru, and Mr. Brock was the first Peru town clerk. It was sold in 1859 to Mr. Dwayne L. Kent, a leading marble magnate. Mr. Kent's wife was a sister of Ira Cochran, another East Dorset benefactor and businessman. Kent was engaged in the marble business as early as 1850. Here's a view, and you can see that the Kent stone is still out front. He was engaged in the marble business as early as 1850, forming the company Hawley and Kent. It is noted in his obituary that the business closed in 1857 due to a national economic crash. Quote, years later, when Kent was firmly on his feet, he manifested a rare spirit of business honor by paying the workmen who had lost by the failure of his old business debt principal and interest as a Christmas gift. Who does that today? Kent later formed the D.L. Kent Marble Company and erected a large steam marble mill on the other side of East Dorset. The business was so successful that in his obituary it said he left his excellent wife and family a very handsome estate. The D.L. Kent was the principal contributor to the resurrection of the Catholic Church in East Dorset, including the marble for the front steps, and gave liberally to support the Congregational Church. He served in the state legislature for one term, and the Kent family ownership continued until 1907, when the house was sold to Mr. John Marcellus Griffith. J.M. Griffith and his heirs were the proprietors of the Griffith store at Village Street from 1870 to 1926. I'm sorry. Okay, across the road now, on the south side of the road, we're looking at another Batchelder house. Land records ascribe early ownership of this land to Ira Cochran. There's no structure here on the 1856 Rice map, but the Beers 1869 map shows a house and assigns ownership to John L. Batchelder, Cochran's brother-in-law. So you see what he was doing. He owned all this land on the south side of Madtown Road, and he sold it off in small pieces to his in-laws, his wife's family. His wife was a Cochran, okay? And Batchelder, so John L. Batchelder. Batchelder is listed as a boss in quarry on the 1880 census. In the 1880 Bennington County Business Director, he is listed as a marble producer. Interestingly, his wife, Rachel Batchelder, is listed solely in conveyance deeds in 1868 and 85. It's unusual that a woman's name would be listed on the deed when a piece of property was sold. And this property was then sold to another woman, Catherine Kendall, in 1885, becoming the Silas Kendall Place until it was sold in 1908. Silas was a carpenter and the youngest son of the blacksmith, Hartwell, who lived on Village Street, and we'll show his house a little bit later. His older brother Harry, also a carpenter, owned the land and house to the south of this one on Pleasant Street. The Batchelder and Kendall families directly contributed to the growth and development of the East Dorset village during their years of ownership, 1860 to 1908, applying their skills in the quarries or literally building the community. Okay, and back on, jumping up on the north side of, across the street now on the north side of Madtown Road. This is exactly how this house is looking right now. It's been lifted up and put on a new foundation. It was flooded twice, within the last 2 years. It was not a happy scene. The most significant activity at or near this location occurred from 1810 to 1838 with the arrival of Jonathan Fenton and sons, Christopher and Richard. Fenton Pottery, folks, right here on the exhibit, okay? Fenton Pottery. Jonathan Fenton founded his pottery business in Dorset Hollow, right here on this side of the mountain, in 1800. By 1810, he and his sons had moved to East Dorset. Local lore and diggings in the soil suggest that this property and the one adjacent to it, be here, may have been where Fenton produced some of his pottery. We can't exactly clinch it. We haven't found the smoking gun yet, but all evidence points to this property and the property next door. By 1869, the Beers Atlas assigns ownership of this house to A.E. Batchelder, family with many members working in the marble mills and quarries. Subsequent ownership passed from the Batchelder family to the Leary family in 1904. A great-grandson still living in the area reports that Daniel was a blacksmith at the marble quarry, and another great-grandson still owns the house and had the happy responsibility of paying for the new foundation to be built underneath this house. And I'm sorry. This is a previous picture of the house when it, in better days, maybe around 1960. Okay, back to the corner now. Let's say we're going to go back down Village Street. So we're going to come we're gonna come west on Mad Tom Road to Wilson House and turn down Village Street, okay? There used to be 2 Batchelder houses here. I only have pictures of one, the other one just doesn't exist anymore. The 1856 map shows 2 houses to the south of the East Dorset Hotel with the names J.W. Batchelder, first south, and G. Batchelder, second south. This is the second one. Ira Cochran and his second wife, Susan Batchelder Cochran, lived in the 3rd house south, okay? So he built the hotel, he built 2 houses, this is one of them, and then his house was right next door. The Batchelder brothers were carpenters who also worked in the marble mills. It's possible that they built these 2 houses around 1855. J.W. Batchelder was the Dorset town clerk from 1862 to 64. And according to Swift's Vermont Register Almanac, he also manufactured fork and hoe wooden handles. On the 1868 Beers Atlas map, there are several mentions of the Batchelders as funders of the Atlas. Batchelder, John L. Foreman, East Dorset Marble Quarry. Batchelder, George, Master Mechanic, East Dorset. Batchelder and Bowen, marble finishes and designers in marble, dealers in all kinds of American and foreign marbles, such as monuments, tombstones, tablets, tabletops, posts of all styles finished to order. So that's the kind of product that the marble mills were producing. Okay. Further on down Village Street now is the Harwood House. In the mid-19th century, this was the home of Franklin G. Harwood. Mr. Harwood was part of the extensive Harwood family which settled in southwest Vermont. Parentheses, a cousin, Hiram Harwood, had kept a farm journal for 27 years, recounting the trials and tribulations of running a large family in what is today's Old Bennington. And his diary is part of the extensive holdings at the Bennington Museum. So if you wanted to read about it, you can. Franklin Harwood made his money in the local lumber business, owning many acres of land towards the southern part of East Dorset. An 1856 East Dorset map shows him living at this exact location. By 1869, he's shown operating a custom grist and sawmill just to the south of the house, and another property south and on the west side of today's Route 7. As a lumberman, he was either a competitor or a colleague with Ira Cochran, the wealthiest man in Dorset. Mr. Cochran lived up the road from this house, and he had sold Mr. Harwood the land on which this house was built. And Mr. Harwood was married to, who do you think? One of Mr. Cochran's youngest sisters. He had 2 younger sisters that were actually born in East Dorset, and Mr. Harwood married one of those girls. By 1855, Frank Harwood was the ninth wealthiest man in all of Dorset, as listed in the grand list of that year. And here's a photo from maybe 1960. And a picture of Franklin Harwood. I have to tell this story. This is an amazing story of how the internet has connected us all. The woman who presently lives in the yellow house, the Harwood house, got an email one day from a guy who works in New York City, whose mother lives in California. That's where he grew up. He was online just kind of searching for things about East Dorset because he knew the family was from here. He contacted his mother about the woman who lives and runs a little business in the yellow house that I just showed you, and she sent these photos from California, courtesy of her son, who found the listing on the internet of Kate, who presently owns the yellow house. So, an amazing story to me of history coming full circle, shall we say. Okay? Okay, so that's the end of talking about that family, the Cochran family, and all the people, all the members, and the houses that they had something to do with. We're now moving on to talking about the Sexton family. It'll be the same kind of thing. People living on a farm on the outside of East Dorset, moving into town. We're going to talk about Joseph Sexton and his 4 daughters. The tintype, by the way, is here at the Dorset Historical Society, courtesy of Ruth, who found this through her various contacts. So the first daughter we're going to talk about is Minerva Sexton Brophy and her husband Harvey Albee Brophy. Minerva was named after her father's first wife. They used to do this apparently. The first wife was named Minerva, died with the baby when it was born. And so he and the second wife named their first daughter Minerva after the first wife who had died. Sounds a little strange to us, but it was a different time, right? It was a different time. Okay, so on Mad Tom Road on the north side, the earliest records attribute extensive land holdings north of Mad Tom Road to the Ames family, extending eastward from the church. All right, so in your head, think of the Congregational Church. We're talking about all the land east of there now, okay? During the late 19th century, these Ames lands were divided and sold to those who had come to work in and support the marble industry. Such was the case with this property. The Rice-Harwood 1856 map is labeled J. Wright with a building icon on it. There is no building icon for this lot on the 1869 Beers Atlas, only BPB initials. Buffum, Paris, Bowen. Here's an old house, or here's the same house now, with the nice wraparound porch from about the year 1900. Here's as it is today, obviously in the winter. And this is, we have a photo of Mr. Buffum, Paris, Bowen, sold this lot to Harvey Brophy in 1871, which suggests that it was Harvey Brophy who built this house. Harvey Brophy was a Civil War veteran who grew up in East Dorset, the son of Irish immigrant parents, who returned in 1864 to work and eventually owned the P.D. Ames General Store on Mad Tom Road, right behind the church. So in your head, if you remember where the big white Congregational Church is, there was a store immediately behind that. I'll have a picture for you in a minute. As a merchant, Brophy supplied goods for the farm and marble industry workers living in the area, contributing greatly to the growth and development of the East Dorset village. And ownership of this house remained in the Brophy family until 1939. The record property transfers indicate that Harvey, the Civil War veteran, returned home, married a local farmer's daughter, worked in and subsequently owned the general store just down the street. He bought this property from his nephew, Dr. John Buffum, for $10. The day after, Dr. Buffum had bought it from someone else. And Harvey then turned around and sold it to his daughter, Bessie Stone, 5 years later. This activity shows the continuing ability of a Civil War veteran who had returned home after the war to provide for his family in a substantial way. It continues the pattern of familial relationships in this village where people married other locals and returned home even after having spent some time away. And the Brophies and the Stones remain a local family still active in civic affairs. Ruth, this is wonderful writing.
I'm just going just to point out, those last two houses that were shown were Ruth Brophy Fowler's home. Ruth and married Bob Fowler, who was from Manchester, in 1944. Prior to that, she had lived in East Dorset, and much of this material came from her. She had her family family photos and all of that. It was sort of a starting point for this whole research. Her memories of the village and her the fact that she had kept all the family pictures and stories. So
like that tin type that I showed.
Ruth is still alive. She's 94. I mean 98.
And just to clarify, we were advised when Ruth and I started the application process to be a historic district, we were advised to have a start and an end point. And we were advised, don't take it any further than 1920. So we cut it off at 1920. So that's why I'm not telling you anything much about 40s and 60s and all of that, okay? So the next house further west, today is we know it as the Comar house. This household is an example of small town relationships and intra-family marriages which characterize this village. The Civil War sharpshooter, Harvey Brophy, returned home, married a local farmer's daughter, went to work in the local store, and provided for his family in this village. Property records indicate that in 1912, he sold this piece of land to his son, Gilbert Brophy, after buying and selling the house immediately next door, one that I just showed you, to his daughter, Bessie, for $1. So he sold this one to his daughter for $1, and then sold the land, this piece of land, to his son Gilbert. His purchase of the property from Dr. John Buffum in 1907 is another intra-family transfer, as Dr. Buffum was his nephew, who sold it to him for $10. Gilbert Brophy took over the family store, that's the one behind the church, when he returned from World War I, providing for the needs of farm families and marble workers. Although this house is the newest of the old within our time period, it is still over 100 years old. Significantly, its four-square style mirrors the only other hip roof in East Dorset Village, which was the Catholic parsonage. But the parsonage was built in 1868. We'll look at the parsonage later. Okay, so that's the end of the Teresa Sexton, Harvey Brophy set of information I have for you. Now let's go on to daughter number 2 now. We're still talking about the Sexton family. This is Teresa Sexton with her husband, Experience Barrows, and 2 of their children in a photo from about 1890. Experience was from a very old Dorset family located up here in the Hollow. The house is still there. The old Barrows house is still there. Teresa and Experience married in 1876, and they first moved. She left East Dorset and moved to the Hollow, and they farmed for about 20 years, and then they started taking in summertime visitors, specializing in traveling artists. And then that worked out to be so well that they decided maybe we could do even better if we moved into town. And so they moved into town and started the Barrows House, right? So the Barrows House Hotel is from about 1900, and what it looks like today was actually started by a local farmer, another farm girl from East Dorset, who came over to this side of the mountain and started the Barrows House Hotel. So she left East Dorset. So this is daughter number 3 now, is Helen Sexton, who married John Buffum, and they have the house at 204 Madtom Road. So that's on the south side of Madtom Road. There's no building on the 1856 map in this location, but one is labeled S. Grout on the 1869 map. Ira Cochran owned hundreds of acres in the village area, having inherited his father's purchases, which began in 1778. Land records trace this parcel. I'll show you the picture. Yeah, this house, all right? From Ira Cochran to Grout in 1869. Stephen Grout was the station agent for the Bennington-Rutland Railroad, of which Ira Cochran was one of the directors. Grout was also the postmaster and the manager of the local American Union Telegraph Service. He left East Dorset for around 1900. The next owner, Thomas Sheridan, was an Irish immigrant quarryman, also left for California, and it's he who sold to John and Helen Sexton Buffum in 1907. As a blacksmith, it's safe to speculate that John Buffum and other families who lived in this house from 1869 made their livelihood from the marble operations on Green Peak and provided services for the farming community centered along the railroad in East Dorset Village. Okay. And here's a lovely picture of what it looks like today. This is the south side of Madtom Road now, east of the Wilson House, of course. Okay, and the final daughter is Cora Sexton. She actually grew up in the house next door to the house that the others grew up in. Let's see. So as with many properties in East, sorry, I'm going to move on here. Yeah, this is that same house. This is the old Sexton house around the bend out on Madtom Road. Okay. As with many properties, let me make sure I'm telling you about the right one here. Okay, yeah, we're on the last of the Sexton's notes now. This land was originally owned by Ira Cochran, and his ownership has passed through 100 years of the same family. In the 1872 Cochran to Eggleston deed specified that they will build and maintain a fence around said lot. Seems like a requirement with all Cochran property sales. He always specified, even when he was selling off just a quarter acre, that there would be some kind of a fence. And so that's why you can see today even low stone fences in the backyards and in the side properties. Goes all the way back to the deed from Ira Cochran. It's unclear when this house was built. It may be a structure noted on the Beers Atlas. Okay, this house is what we're talking about here. It's unclear when this house was built. It may be the structure noted on the Beers 1869 Atlas. The Vermont Domestic Missionary Society became the owner of this house in 1890. Again, with a condition that, quote, the officers of the society shall well and truly keep said premises for the use as a parsonage of the Congregational Church. So the Congregational Church was up on the corner there, right? And this, today, if you look at it, it's the White House with purple shutters. Purple shutters and a purple mailbox out front, okay? And in 1919, George and Cora Sexton Abbott became the owners. So here they are again. George was the farm hand for her father, Joseph Sexton. They married in 1887. These were their 2 children. The sad story here is Clifford Copping, in his 1918 Army uniform, was one of those who died of the Spanish flu before he was even sent overseas. So he never even saw any service because he died of the flu down in Massachusetts before being able to be shipped out. But anyway, so this house remained in this family until 2022, when Cora's granddaughter by marriage passed away. So it's now in new hands. Okay, so this is the end of talking about the Sexton family. We're now going to talk about D.G. Williams and his family. So this was Sexton house number 2, but it's also the D.G. Williams house from about 1825. I wish I had a picture to show you of D.G. Williams or his father, but look what happened. Dr. Albemarle Williams of Dorset was suddenly killed in the north part of this town on Saturday evening by falling from his wagon. He was found with the lines wound around his legs and his neck under one of the wheels. Horrible way to die, right? So this is his widow, Ruth Williams. They had both come from Wells, had moved to East Dorset. She moves away with most of the children other than the first son. The first son was D.G., Daniel G. Williams. He inherited the property and everything that was there. The Erie Canal had opened up. Vermonters there was a giant sucking sound of Vermonters moving west once the Erie Canal opened up. And so Ruth and most of her children are to be found buried somewhere in Michigan. Most of them made it as far as Michigan and stopped. Okay? So, during the last half of the 1800s, East Dorset Village was the center of industrial activity in Dorset Township. This house was built during that time period, specifically the late 19th century. This is the number 241. Today it's the Schwartz house on the north side of Madtown Road. This house was possibly built by the neighbor across the street, listed on the 1868 Beers Atlas as being William Landfear, a carpenter, listed in the 1870 census. All of the houses built immediately after the Civil War in this part of town are of this Greek Revival with wing style. Here's another picture of the wing. All right, very, very common style. Mrs. D.G. Williams, so D.G. Williams was the first son. He inherited everything, so they stayed here, right? Mrs. D.G. Williams was Sally Bowen. Remember I showed you a Bowen family house out on Bowen Hill Road, which is still, Bowen Hill Road is still there. He had married a daughter, Sally Bowen Williams, and she was the widow of D.G. Williams, one of the early founders of the local Union Church Society and contributing citizen to the town. Their daughter, yes, get ready, Jane Williams, married P.D. Ames. right? You've heard that name already, right? Owner of the general store. So everybody married somebody local, right? So now we're gonna look across the street. Remember I mentioned the, Mr. Landfear was a carpenter who may have built that house? So this is the Landfear house, number 224. An active marble industry was propelling East Dorset's growth as laborers came to work and live. Built during the late 19th century post-Civil War period, this house is identified with W.H. Landfear on the 1868 Beers Atlas. Landfear is listed in the census as a carpenter. A note in the December 29th, 1868 Manchester Journal Personals column says, Mr. William Landfear is building himself a new house on East Road, Maton Road, nearly opposite the late residence of Daniel G. Williams, and will have it completed the 1st of April. This is December 29th. Works all winter.
Had a lot of help.
We'll have it completed by the 1st of April next. Although a carpenter by trade, Landfear was also active in public affairs, serving as a selectman, overseer of the poor, lister, and justice of the peace. And he twice served in the state legislature. And I have these two little details here to show you. Maybe because it's a little fancier than most of the other houses on Bantam Road, and see this kind of fancy dental treatment here and kind of the extra, like we have this part at our house, but we don't have these extra little doodads. So maybe because he was a carpenter, right? He decided to do something a little special with his house. Okay, so now we're gonna go back down and look at P.D. Ames' house. This is down on Village Street now, south of the Cochrane House. Franklin Harwood, who we talked about earlier, that yellow house that I showed you, proprietor of the neighboring house to the south and adjacent lumberyard, conveyed this land to Plinn D. Ames, P.D. Ames, for this house in 1868. Doesn't look like 1868, does it? Ames was one of the early merchants in town and the son of Benjamin Ames, owner of the large early farm known as Elmwood. Showed you that picture early on, north of East Dorset Village. And he was the son-in-law of D.G. Williams, of a Revolutionary War family from Connecticut. The Williams family had lived on Bantam Road for more than 30 years. P.D. Ames is identified with this structure on the 1869 map. P.D. Ames is listed as a merchant in East Dorset in the Walton Business Directory from 1860 into the 1890s. And the reason why this doesn't look like a really old house is there was a fire. And the front section of that house from perhaps 1840 or 1880 was burned. And this was the replacement. So what you're looking at now, when you look at this house, this whole is the front section. There's a wing off to the back, which is the original part. Remember I talked about that earlier, that on these old houses, there's usually a wing off the back, and that's the real oldest part, and the new part is facing the street. This is from about 1860, 1960, and it was an Aladdin home. And they were advertised, somebody was asking me, was this a Sears home? It wasn't a Sears home, but it was the same idea. It was like a DIY house in a kit, right? And this house is located right across the street from the railroad tracks. So I'm sure one day, back in 1960 perhaps, the train pulled up, stopped right across the road, and they unloaded this kit, a kit house. And that's what this whole section of this house is. That's why it doesn't look like an old house. The back section is old, the front section is from about 1960. Okay. So in the Dorset Town records from 1852, P.D. Ames had bought a 7.5 rod parcel of land from the Union Society Church. Quote, with the provision that P.D. Ames shall have no rights to erect any kind of a framed building less than 20 feet from the meeting house, okay? So the white church that you can see today, this is the store that was built directly behind the church, not less than 20 feet from the meeting house. And the church representatives signing this sale were D.G. Williams, Ira Cochrane, and Benjamin Ames, all early and active East Dorset residents. By 1856, the Rice-Harwood map identifies a store and post office behind the church. The Walton Business Directory for 1860 lists P.D. Ames as the agent for the New England Protective Union. Parentheses, the New England Protective Unit was established in 1849 as a cooperative movement which provided people in the city with rural produce in exchange for goods from the city to stock local stores. At the height of the movement, there were several divisions, cooperatives like this in Vermont. And this building operated continuously as one of 2 stores in East Dorset until it burned down in 1926. Okay, so right behind the church, you'll have to imagine this, it's an open space now. Okay, we're coming up the home stretch, folks. These are just a few more, but very important houses. This is on Mad Tom Road, one of the lovely houses on the south side. The 3 prominent owners of this house were Frederick Field, Hiram Hawley, and William Freedley, who also owned quarries on the east side of Green Peak during the last half of the 1800s, processing the marble in the mills located in East Dorset Village. The marble industry was the cornerstone of the village's economy, providing livelihood for its families. And I'm sure you've noticed, if any of you have driven through East Dorset at any time, the sidewalks are marble, the house foundations are marble, many of the front steps are marble, the basements are lined with marble. It was the local material, right? In 1867, Mr. Field hosted community fathers here who discussed the organization of a congregational church to replace the Union Society church that had been built years earlier. And that's the white building that still stands. This house was sold in 1933 to the present owners. One bit of history explains that the presence of a large pile of marble in the backyard covered with dirt and grass today is because Mr. Freedley wanted a hill for his children to use for sledding in the winter. So this building is significant for its architecture as an example of Greek revival with Italian detailing. It's an earlier, from about 1960 view of the same house. And the next house, this is the last one on Mad Tom Road. This house is a good example of high-style Italianate in a small rural village. Built as it was for one of the largest farmers in North Dorset, it demonstrates the general move to the village center with the arrival of the railroad and related amenities such as the hotel and train depot. In 1868, the Hewlett Estate sold this with 45 acres for $5,000 to the Roman Catholic Diocese of Burlington. The Right Reverend Louis de Gosbrand bought it to serve as the first residence for the local Catholic priest. He possibly had himself in mind, too, for the occasions when he needed to visit Southwest Vermont from Burlington for church-related duties in Bennington County. This rectory was built before the church building, just down Murray Lane. In fact, the Manchester Journal included an ad by the Catholic Diocese advertising this house for sale in August of 1872. This is what it would have looked like in 1872. Writing, quote, "Wishing to build a church," because there wasn't one, "and needing funds for that purpose, the subscriber offers for sale the Catholic parsonage in East Dorset, consisting of a fine residence and 1.5 acres of land, nicely fitted up at great expense. The whole forms one of the finest residences in the country and will be sold on reasonable terms." They evidently changed their minds. And the Catholic Diocese of Burlington retained this residence until 1998, when it was sold to a private individual, and it's in private hands today. Okay, and finally, we're going back to look at 2 little houses that don't look like much on the side of the road now. This is looking up. If you're standing in the road now, with the hotel here and the post office over there, you're looking north. All right, this is north up Village Street at this point. Number 38, North Village Street, is significant as it has been identified as being a blacksmith shop. The Beers 1869 map labels this property as belonging to H. Kendall, blacksmith and blacksmith and inventor Hartwell Kendall lived and worked in the village of East Dorset. In 1842, he was issued a patent for the construction of a cheese press. A copy of his patent is here at the Dorset Historical Archives. He's identified in the 1863 Walton's Business Directory as an inventor and manufacturer of cheese presses. In 1880, he's listed as a blacksmith, an important trade supporting the livelihood of farmers, mills, merchants, and travelers. Today, it's associated with the Alcoholics Anonymous movement and its co-founder, Bill Wilson. This is the library that the Wilson House operates in. That's this house, okay? Fayette Griffith, Bill Wilson's maternal grandfather, was a Civil War veteran who had a farm east of the village, north on Madtown Road. They subsequently moved into town and lived in this house, raising Bill and his siblings here. A bedroom upstairs in this building is interpreted today by the Wilson House as being where Bill slept, played music, and wrote as a young man growing up in East Dorset. And this is more how you see it today, a wintertime view. And just north of this house is this little red one. This building is significant for commerce. S.W. Jacobs is identified as the resident at this location on the Rice and Harwood 1856 map. A shop is located on the map to the north. The 1869 Beers Atlas identifies F.W. Jacobs at this location, although there is no shop on the map. In the 1880 Bennington County Business Directory, Francis W. Jacobs is listed as a shoemaker who owns 4 acres and 26 acres of mountain land. Remember I said how people lived on the outskirts and then came into town? But sometimes they retained their acreage out there for their horses, source of feed, etc. Okay? So this property is believed to have been, I'm talking about the little red one here, is believed to have been the town cobbler's house, one of 2 essential businesses at the time, the other being the blacksmith next door. Okay? Zadok Thompson, writing in his Geography and Geology of Vermont in 1848, wrote, "The only trades which were then deemed indispensable were those of the blacksmith and the shoemaker. And these were, for the most part, carried on by people who labored a portion of their time on their own farms." So everybody was a farmer still, but they came into town to practice business, okay? So this building is significant under criterion A for community planning and development as a business that provided essential goods, shoes, especially important for farmers and marble workers. Besides shoes, this business provided leather products for the farms, as well as for the horses and oxen transporting the marble. So think of that. Guess what? That's the end of my nose. It's not the end of my talk, however. Let's just talk a little bit now about this whole business of historic designations and what they are. Okay? This is a graphic that the Preservation Trust of Vermont has put together to show what does loss of integrity mean, because integrity is what the folks at the national level look at and the folks in Montpelier look at when they are giving out historic identities. Okay, so for 100 years, a house like this style would look 1875 to 1975 looked the same. 4 years later, it looked like this. 4 years later, it looked like this. Loss, 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 all the way up to 1990. So in a span of 15 years, integrity was lost for this one property by taking away the original elements of that house. So that's, to me, that's just a really good visual of what loss of integrity means. So from the Department of the Interior, the National Park Service website, these are the people who give the National Register designation. All right, this is what you can find. What are the restrictions? Because everybody, I hear this all the time. I'm afraid, I don't want a historic designation, I don't want anybody telling me what my house has to look like, right? Under federal law, the listing of a property in the National Register places no restrictions on what a non-federal owner may do with their property, up to and including destruction. You can buy a property and knock it down. It happened here on Dorset West Road not too long ago. Unless the property is involved in a project that receives federal money, okay? Usually funding or licensing, and that only goes for businesses. Nobody gets federal money just for your house, right? Don't we all know that? Nobody gets money just for your house. You have to have a business. If you're starting up a business, that puts you in a different category. From the Vermont Division of Historic Preservation, again, this is off their website. First and foremost, listing in the state or national registers is an honorific designation. It's an honor. It's an honor, that's all. That documents the history and significance of a property. Listing does not impose any restrictions on the property owner's use, maintenance, or disposition of the property. And this was sent to me by Devin Coleman, the state architectural historian, who's now at UVM, in fact. So what is a design district now? Because this is what, so if we just saw the state doesn't impose any restrictions and the feds don't impose any restrictions on what you can do, what is this? What is this that people have to come before a design review board here in this part of town, in Dorset, to get approval, right? So they have a design district here, and this was voted in by the people who live over here. Subject to meeting the procedural requirements above, a design area is established as an overlay on the underlying zoning district or historic district affected to preserve the historical, architectural, or cultural character of the district, and to prevent developments which, by their incompatibility with the prevailing building and settlement patterns, will diminish the quality of the prevailing patterns and will diminish the quality of the environment and the quality of life therein. So that's what a design overlay is all about, okay? So now, this is a picture. 1 week after East Dorset, Ruth and I got the notification that East Dorset had gotten the state designation. A week later, I'm driving down Mad Tom Road and I almost crashed into a telephone pole when I saw this. Can everybody tell what this is? What is this? This is marble, right? It's a marble sidewalk here.
Those are concrete bricks.
Marble sidewalk here.
Stonework. They're
Yeah,
concrete
fake bricks.
Yeah.
Fake bricks, like from Home Depot.
Fake, not even concrete.
Right here? Yeah, these very nice people, I'm not casting aspersions on the people because I met them, they're very nice people, very nice, I welcomed them to town. They're from Northern Virginia though. This is what you find all over housing developments in Northern Virginia. If you have a problem on your driveway, and that's what these people have, they have a little bit of a slope from the northeast corner of their driveway to the southwest corner of the driveway. When it rains, the loose chipped slate moves across their lawn. The lawn is here. And so they want to fix the problem. I would want to fix the problem too. So they went to the local Home Depot and bought bricks, just like they would have in Northern Virginia. What's the solution here? There is no design overlay. There is no design review board for East Dorset. But isn't this the beginning of the loss of integrity that I was talking about earlier, right? That if you take, here's a really good example too. I heard the man who was the head of the Smithsonian Institution, Conservation Institute, gave this example 40 years ago, and I never forgot it. He said, let's say you inherit your father's hammer, clawhead hammer, wooden handle, right, clawhead, and you're using that hammer because he left it to you, and one year the clawhead, the iron clawhead breaks, and so you put a new one on. And then you're using it again, and a couple years later the wooden handle breaks, and you go and take off the broken part and put on a new one. Is it still your grandfather's hammer? Right? It's not, is it? That's what we're witnessing here. The reason why East Dorset got the historic designation they got, which is before this happened, was all of the original material was still there. The town has just spent a lot of money restoring the old marble sidewalks that had been replaced years ago with concrete and blacktop and stuff like that. The town has just bought a lot of money from the Danby Quarry, making sure that the sidewalks going down Vantown Road are made out of marble. What do we do? What do we do when a homeowner does what they think is best and goes to Home Depot and buys fake bricks instead of looking around or asking your neighbor, what should I do? Do you know anybody who has some marble? You know, I need to fix my driveway. I don't know. What do you all think about that?
He has every right to do exactly what he did.
He has the right to, yes.
He has every right to do it. He doesn't have any, there's no requirements that he.
There's no requirement.
To do it with marble or whatever, and it's true of everybody that lives within the area. It's just a matter of, do you want to continue preserve the look of the area? And some will and some won't. I mean, there's a couple of houses that are in the district that are now designated as non-conforming. They were old houses that have been altered considerably. The exterior no longer reflects architectural integrity, and they are considered non-conforming.
Yeah, they're called non-contributing.
Non-contributing. And there's
Sir,
a couple
so
of
you
newer
wanted to say
houses.
something?
Well, you could always adopt design review.
You could always,
In the community.
you could always adopt a
And
design
then
review
you
committee.
have to present your plans and it has to be approved. And if it doesn't have integrity and the design review board takes exception to it, they can ask you to please use marble instead of whatever you call that, fake brick or whatever.
So,
And
in fact, I saw this was in my,
We're not gonna do that.
this was in my book
Don't know.
research notes and all that I had, and I found this, that Ruth and I, because we were asked to, we had to address this. For each house, we had to say, what were the aspects of integrity? Did it still retain enough integrity? And so we found this online. This is National Register 101, 7 aspects of integrity. And they are location, the setting, what does the setting look like? What does the design look like? What do the materials look like? What does the workmanship look like? What is the feeling? And I know Ruth had a hard time with this. How do we describe the feeling of East Dorset? You know? And association. What is something associated with a famous person? You know, a founding father or something. And under materials, I want to read you. Materials are the physical elements that were combined or deposited during a particular period of time and in a particular pattern or configuration to form a historic property. So the materials in this case would be marble. See, marble is the local material that defines East Dorset. This definition is complicated because it has to cover archaeological as well as architectural and historical candidates. For the purposes of nominating buildings, materials should be defined as the original wood, nails, shingles, tiles, glass, and or other substances the builders use to create the resource. To have integrity, a property must retain its character defining exterior materials. Sometimes interior integrity is needed as well. So, I mean, I don't have an answer for you. All I know is I almost crashed my car. I'm serious. I'm driving by and I went, whoa, what is that? Looking at that thing, you know.
Yeah, but the other thing is the same applies to the sidewalks. We are very fortunate that the town opted to replace the sidewalks or refurbish the sidewalks with marble. But there was nothing that dictated that that had to happen. And some of the properties, Michelle said, some of the property owners had concrete slabs in front of their house, which we didn't realize until we started scraping all of but again, you know, it's just a matter of community pride. Town and community pride.
Well, short of a design which I think that's what you're gonna end up having to do, but short of that, I mean, the only thing to do would be when people are about to purchase a house, all right, that there may be a requirement of something put in the purchase, that the property must, retain,
Covenant.
yeah, a covenant of sorts. That, I guess you work that out with realty, the state, I don't, the region, I'm not sure all the legal parts, but, it seems a little less than going the full thing, but I don't see what would be wrong with letting people know when they're gonna buy something.
Yeah, that's
that
essential,
they're-
isn't it? That's
you're-
essential.
Yeah,
Letting
it's
people-
essential,
it happens-
right.
it happens over
And
here,
also
too.
the property, value may well diminish, because much of that value is because it's holding to a historic, I don't know how you'd word it, but something of that kind. It might be easier than getting the designation, I don't know, I don't.
It
Yes,
is
what
possible
did you
to
say?
get
Something?
possible.
Right.
Nancy had a comment too.
So, my understanding is, that Dorset,
This
here,
side of the mountain.
this side, was designated, historical.
On the National Register.
Right,
Yeah.
around, sometime in the 70s or.
1880s, like
Oh,
sorry,
18.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. No, like 1985 to 89.
Right, so, but there was a committee,
Yeah.
right, and they,
Yep,
okay.
yep.
And then they, the town decided to make a design review board
Yeah,
for the historical district.
yeah.
And very specifically, you could do anything in the inside, but not on the outside if
Yeah.
it,
Yeah.
you know.
So long as it's not visible from the road.
Right, so, I don't know when they put that design board in.
That's a good question. I don't know.
And, I mean, after
Yeah.
it became a historic,
Do you know?
They had to designate it as a historic district or a zone. They had to adopt zoning that said that this particular area is a historic district. And then they put that zoning overlay, so it's all related to town bylaws and zoning bylaws. So the area that is the Dorset Village Historic District was voted by the town to be zoned as a historic district, which then required the establishment of a design review board.
but when did they put that into effect? Do you have any idea?
Well, it's in the 1980s, whenever, it was shortly after that historic district.
Oh, okay, so shortly after.
Yes, yeah.
So why can't they do that for East Dorset?
They could, but it'd have to be voted
Right.
for by the town. And getting, having pursued this project right from the get-go, informing all of the people that were involved, the town, the historical society, et cetera, there was a lot of pushback about, I want to be able to do what I want to be able to do with my property. So my suspicion is that if there was any attempt to make East Dorset Historic District zoned area with design review, it would not go through.
Wouldn't pass. Yeah.
The whole village of Manchester is subject to that.
Correct.
And they just, very recent ruling on that was the house on the corner of Taconic Avenue and Route 7. They started to renovate, and then the owners subsequently renewed the carriage house and decided they didn't want to finish the house and sought to take it down, and it was not allowed to be taken down because it's considered a historic building, and there was quite a wrangling now. The owners have decided to complete the renovation of it, but that's just a real big example of what
Yes.
design review can do
Yes.
there, which it was a subject of some court action, frankly, and,
Wow.
or at least there was going to be court action. I think they settled without it, but at least it's preserving the village of Manchester's integrity exterior. I don't think they give a darn what you do with the inside of the
Right,
house.
right, or even in your backyard, so long
It
as
could
it's not
be.
visible from
Yeah,
the
it
street.
could be, I don't know exactly how this
Yeah.
one reads,
Yeah.
but,
Well, an example is this house right directly across the street here. That's undergone some significant restoration. It's one of the oldest houses in Dorset Village. And the front side of that house, the roof, they put slate on. The back side is metal roof. But they replaced all the windows, and they all had to be of the style
yeah.
of the original. And that's a historic district.
Well, it had to come before the review board to do that.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
But, you know, when we bought, our house in Dorset, and we were told, you know, before we bought it, this is in the historic district.
You were.
So we were informed, you know, there's certain things you're gonna have to,
Comply with.
comply with.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it was made quite clear.
Well, thank you for coming, everybody. Thank you very much.
Oh, there's some, on the, table out there, there's some, handouts that are with the history of East Dorset, chronology, and a list of the resources that we generated and utilized as well. Thank you very much, that was fun.
Yeah, so thank you everybody for coming. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you, John, for having me.
And just a quick, before everyone leaves, we do have plenty of hors d'oeuvres, cookies, and liquid refreshment for people. It's really yummy this month. If you like this but want to do it all over again, but while walking, on Sunday, October 6th, there will be an East Dorset Historic District hike.
Walk.
Led by someone called Ruth Stewart, I think, who's right there.
Yeah.
On October 17th, next third Thursday lunchtime lecture, Kim Norman will be coming over and talking about the Wilson House. She's the director over there, and we'll have a presentation on that. And in November, I believe it's Kevin O'Toole talking about the Dorset Field Club history. So some good events coming up. Also next Thursday, going a little bit afield, over at the Rupert Methodist Church, state archaeologist Jesse Robinson will be talking about native populations in southwestern Vermont and Washington County area, New York, pre-settlement. So that'll be a good presentation on the Mohegan tribe. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, John.
Well, presently.